good afternoon or good morning. I thank the invitation and I thank and congratulate the members of the organizing committee, Alice Nogueira Alves, Ana Mafalda Cardeira, Jorge dos Reis, Maria Teresa Sabido, Marina Albuquerque, Marta Costa Frade, Miguel Gomes, and Rogério Taveira, for a magnificent work in this international congress, The Art of Plaster, Between Creation and Reproduction, Study and Preservation, despite this pandemic. Thank you very much. I would like to inform that would like to inform you that the text I wrote and this communication we wrote and our communication will be carried out with Marta Frade, who is naturally co-author, and if there is any mistake, Marta Frade is to blame. I think that within a plaster collection, such as that of the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Lisbon, with over 900 inventoried pieces, it should be possible to travel, perhaps following an intuitive map as proposed by James Elkins in his Stories of Art 2002. This collection of plaster, the most important in Portugal and one of the most significant in Europe, is without any doubt a huge field of memory for Portuguese and European sculpture. And this is a map. You can see here examples of history of art maps. This made by James Elkins. This an art history graduate student in China, and this an undergraduate art student from United States. And this is one map that I wrote about history of art. Based, and this is a sentence that I think all art historians should read and should think about. Based on the well-known scheme by Rosalind Krauss, Professor Fernando António Batista Pereira, from 2016 onwards, has advanced with a proposal to the Sciences of Art and Heritage Department at the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Lisbon, which we can see. This is the diagram of the diagrammatic model in three perspectives or strands. This is the two, and this is the scheme that we can translate in this scheme with three perspectives or strands: a humanist history of art, aesthetics, theory of art, collection, taste, artistic and technical. The other, how to produce in a fine arts faculty, how to draw, paint, sculpture, materials, techniques, and so on, and the scientific physics, chemistry, methods of examination and analysis, mainly linked to conservation and restoration. We try to use the same scheme in our plaster collection, and we think that it can be studied in three perspectives that are, of course, interconnected. Every inventory, as this plaster collection, is truly a work in progress. An example of this was when, in 2016, the collection of our faculty received some molds by João Farroso, contributing to the history of this alumni who became a sculptor and teacher at the once School Fine Arts of Lisbon, now Faculty of Fine Arts. Elaborating itineraries and routes for a collection is not a simple task, being, of course, quite subjective due to the immense conditions, thoughts, and judgments of taste. However, we think that the Plaster collection should be divided, like the sculpture itself, into statuary and ornamental sculpture or decorative sculpture. And now we change positions. The sculpture of phytomorphic, zoomorphic, and geometric ornaments ranges from classical Greek and Roman expressions to Renaissance, passing through Islamic decoration, making this ornamental typology part of the most glyptotext. Also, in this Plaster collection, the journey through ornamental sculpture ends with some pieces, few but interesting, of modern and abstract expression already belonging to the 20th century. Closely related to ornamental sculpture are dozens of architectural examples: bases, columns, capitals, friezes, and cornices, which were fundamental for architecture classes in academies and fine art schools, with Lisbon, of course, not being an exception. In this way, it is possible to glimpse many fragments and pieces of architecture based on the treatises, especially the famous by Jacopo Barozzi da Vignola that was followed and copied. In this group of architecture, there are also models and fragments of buildings like the Opéra de Paris by Charles Garnier, in addition to studies of stereotomy. The division into major sculptures and the three relief typologies can also be observed, studied, and understood in this collection. Bas relief, medium relief, and high relief, of course. Another interesting part is that which concerns medallions and their respective representation techniques, which are, moreover, very close to the issue of reliefs. This sculpture typology, indebted to ancient medals and coins, constitutes, like the relief technique, one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of European sculpture until the 19th century, having fallen into disuse in the 20th century. In fact, the medallion has everything to do with the sculpture's technique of relief, composition, and even the design of letters. We don't have any medallion here, but you will see when we visit our collection. Therefore, it is interesting to analyze the evolution of medallions from the Renaissance mannerism to the 19th century with European and Portuguese examples. One of the most immediate itineraries in a collection of plasters will be a journey through antiquity, observing in this case the friezes of Phidias of the Parthenon, the Laocoon of the Laocoon group, the Venus, the Milo, Jupiter, Athena, Apollo of Belvedere, Hermes, Dionysus, Diana, Hercules, Perseus, and so on. Another trip that should always be made is around portraits. This can be represented using heads, busts, but also medallions, very common in the 19th century and even in the 20th century. We can find portraits of artists and architects like Michelangelo Buonarroti, Soares dos Reis, Veloso Salgado, Carlos Reis, José Luís Monteiro, José Malhoa, made by other sculptors. These were architects and painters and sculptures of Portuguese, from Portugal, and representations of Portuguese kings and queens, and one portrait of Napoleon by Canova. The portraits of monarchs constitute, in fact, an interesting core of the Plaster collection of the Faculty of Fine Arts of Lisbon. From Dona Maria I, medallions certainly made by Machado Castro and his school, to busts of Dom Pedro IV, Dona Maria II, Dom Pedro V, and Dona Estefânia, Dom Luís I, Dom Carlos I, and Dom Manuel II, the last Portuguese king before the Republic. These royal portraits recalls, on the one hand, the foundation of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Lisbon, carried out by Dona Maria II. Her father is equally understandable for the victory of liberalism. And on the other hand, the proximity of all monarchs to Dona Maria II, from Dona Maria II to Dom Manuel II, to the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, and to the School of Fine Arts of Lisbon, because the Academy and school then separated in 1881. Significantly, in the Plaster collection, there is no portrait of any president of the Portuguese Republic. Another journey that we can establish is that of narratives from mythological scenes passing through the biblical ones to the history of Portugal episodes. In the former, and logically, the materialization of the theory of sculpture from antiquity and Christianity, the history of our country is a consequence of the romantic context in which the Academy of Fine Arts of Lisbon was founded and developed. In this sense, Camões, the Infante, Dom Henrique, Henry the Navigator, Afonso de Albuquerque, or Dom João de Castro are represented in this collection. Viriato, Marta showed a little ago a representation of Viriato, Julgamento de Viriato, Martim de Freitas or Duarte de Almeida, and other heroes are also part of this frieze of national romanticism. We can also make an itinerary with some works or students as pensioners in Paris and Rome, such as the Orphan of Simões de Almeida and Feliciano de Castilho by Moreira Rato. Interesting and very consistent is also the route that can be taken around the plaster pieces of models. In fact, one of the most remarkable exercises in academic teaching was precisely drawing, painting, or modeling from a live model. These exercises performed in a room or in the schools of the academies were therefore called academias in Portuguese. The models could be everything that painters and sculptors proposed to imitate, but also what the sculptor made in clay, wax, plaster, or wooden buildings. And these were the models, of course. The models in fine art schools and academies were still and I quote, men of good figure and well proportioned, choosing to be copied or imitated in drawing, painting, or sculpture, end of quote. Assis Rodrigues, that Mariana showed us, and he was the second director of this academy and the first professor of sculpture. And he was a very wise man. He wrote several books and so on. Close to live models are anatomical parts, male and female torsos, arms, hands, legs, and feet. That is the upper extremities, arms for arms and hands, and lower extremities, thighs, legs, and feet. And also the plaster models of the skin. To make copies of life models, anatomical knowledge and study was and continues to be essential, as witnessed by a few dozen pieces in the collection. Interestingly, it is in the anatomist pieces, as in ornamental sculpture, that the typology of the sculpture fragment is observed. We must also propose an itinerary through funerary sculpture, which ranges from medallions to full-scale sculpture, such as the medallion of Queen Dona Maria I. I've already said that, by Machado Castro, which is found in stone in Basilica of Estrela in Lisbon, and the statue of the tomb of Mademoiselle Alix Legare by Simões de Almeida Sobrinho, which can be seen in stone at Cemetery dos Prazeres, also in Lisbon. In this cemetery, there is an international relief, the cenotaph of Dom Alexandre de Sousa Holstein, inside the mausoleum of the Dukes of Palmela by António Canova. In our collection, we have this piece in plaster made by a teacher of sculpture, Francisco de Paula Araújo Sequeira, in the 19th century. Two students may copy this example of the famous Canova. Another possible itinerary in this glyptothèque is around the animals. Lions, horses, dogs, eagles, and even sheep perpetuate a sculpture tradition that came from antiquity, with some Greek artists becoming famous for their ability to represent them. Among the animals, horses are quite important because they are linked to equestrian status, which is why it is desirable that sculptures add knowledge of equestrian art, or picaria in Portuguese. But also lions and dogs were recurrently represented in European sculpture. The famous weeping lion from the tomb of Clement XIII of Canova has a particular impact in this collection. We can see vases, plates, and elements of military protection. André, the first day of this Congress, made a communication about this topic, such as armor, helmets, and shields of Italian and Renaissance tradition. These objects were the perfect synthesis between sculpture and grotesque decoration, very useful to be studied and reproduced by students of fine arts. In addition, due to its decorative and compositional dimension, they also allude to art history and equipment design or industrial design. In Plaster collection of the Faculty of Fine Arts of Lisbon, and within the romantic context of the plastic arts, there are still some examples referring to monuments, such as, for example, the model of monument to Afonso Albuquerque in Lisbon, 1901, by Costa Mota, and studies of allegorical figures, and perhaps the king himself in some projects for the monument of Dom Pedro IV, 1870, in Rossio, that Marta spoke a little time ago. The importance of models for monument compositions is known, which together with the drawings were submitted to juries. Another fundamental core of the collection is the molding of national monuments. Once again, and Marta also and the group of students show a portico and a pulpit. Once again, we are facing with a romantic characteristic linked to the heritage and study of the Middle Ages, mainly Gothic, and in our country, the famous Manuelino style. an invention of Portuguese Romanticism, whose concept was mainly disseminated by our famous poet Almeida Garrett. This dimension linked to the study of sculpture and Gothic Manuelino architecture established a double relationship with the history of Portuguese art and also with the heritage issues that in the 19th century were consistently developing. Finally, one of the itineraries we propose is around molds themselves, the plaster molds. They perpetuate the negative and the positive, the state of conservation of the work when it is replicated, which allow reading back to possible gaps due to lack of conservation. In fact, the molds are responsible for the dissemination of numerous replicas by European academies. In the group of molds, we can witness their evolution from plaster casts, tacellos, through gelatin and ending in silicones with the use of zippers. At the end, another itinerary, perhaps the most interesting, will be the one that each visitor chooses when visiting the plaster collection of the Faculty of Fine Arts of the University of Lisbon. So you are therefore invited to visit our collection of plasters. Thank you very much.